Okay, let's try and unpack this. It's one of those topics that, well, it can really make your head spin, right? If God knows everything, I mean everything, do we actually have free will? And what is predestination really about? I've been looking through the sources you pulled together, and honestly, I'm curious how they tackle this. It's such a complex thing, this divine foreknowledge and human choice. So our mission, really, for this deep dive is to try and get a clearer picture of how God's knowing things beforehand fits with the choices we make and, how that all impacts salvation. Your material seems to lay out some really helpful distinctions, which I think we'll find pretty enlightening. Right, here's where it starts getting really interesting, I think. The sources you found, they highlight two key terms from Romans 8.29.
Yep.
First, there's foreknowledge, prognosko, you said, meaning like to know ahead of time.
Exactly, to know beforehand.
And then predestination, prorizo, which means to decide beforehand.
That's right, to determine or set the boundary beforehand.
Okay, so the terms are distinct. But still, for a lot of us, the idea that God already knows what we'll choose, that feels, well, tricky. Do these sources kind of help clarify how knowing isn't the same as, like, making us choose?
Yes, absolutely. That's a central point in these texts. What's fascinating is how they frame it. Predestination isn't presented as God forcing anyone's hand. Not at all. It's more that he knows in advance who will freely choose to accept his grace. Think of it maybe like watching a replay of a game you already saw.
Okay.
You know the final score, you know who wins, but the players on the screen, they're still making their moves, playing the game based on their own choices in that moment.
I see. So the outcome is known,
Yeah.
but the actions within the game are still the player's own.
Precisely. The sources are quite clear. God doesn't violate free will. His foreknowledge is about knowing what will happen, not compelling it.
Okay, that replay analogy actually helps quite a bit. So building on that, that knowing versus controlling idea, the material then lays out that sequence from Romans 8.30, right? Those predestined are called, then justified, and finally glorified.
Yes, that progression is clearly outlined.
But there's a subtlety in there that the texts point out, which feels pretty important. They draw a line between being called invited, which seems linked to forgiveness,
The general invitation.
and being chosen or selected, which is tied more directly to like ultimate salvation. It really brings that verse to mind, Matthew 22.14. Many are called, but few are chosen.
A very sobering verse.
Yeah, it always gives me pause. Makes you think about all the invitations, the opportunities maybe, versus, well, how we actually respond.
And if you connect that to the larger picture presented in these sources, the implication is quite significant. It suggests salvation isn't just a past event, but an ongoing process. It's about actively choosing to stay within God's grace. You mentioned the research notes on the Book of Life from Revelation.
Yes, how names are written in it.
Right. But crucially, they also point to Revelation 3.5, where it talks about names being potentially blotted out.
Okay, so inclusion isn't necessarily permanent.
Well, it underscores that sticking with it, perseverance in faith, is vital. It's about, as Peter puts it, making your calling and election sure.
So the takeaway for us, for our actual lives then, it sounds like our continued commitment, actively staying engaged in faith, isn't just optional.
It seems presented as essential, an ongoing part of walking in that grace you've received.
Okay. And then there's the whole divine sovereignty aspect. The material brings up that potter and clay image from Romans 9.
A classic analogy.
It's a powerful image for sure. God is the potter, us as the clay. But I could see how some might find that, I don't know, a bit disempowering, like we have no say. Do the sources address that sort of human reaction, that tension between God's sovereignty and our feeling of agency?
That's a really important question. And the sources don't necessarily frame it as disempowering, but more about perspective. It's perhaps less about questioning God's right as the creator, his wisdom and justice from our limited view.
Right, like the clay questioning the potter.
Exactly. And on the point about grace, because grace is absolutely central, the question becomes, how does our effort fit with God's gift? These texts seem to suggest that grace isn't something that cancels out our will. Instead, grace is what actually enables our free will to genuinely choose him.
So grace makes the choice possible in the first place.
That seems to be the idea. Think about some of the biblical examples mentioned, like Jeremiah or Paul, God knew their paths, their calling, even before they were born. It was foreknown.
Right, their destinies were known.
Yes, but their lives still involved their own choices, their struggles, their obedience. God's foreknowledge didn't erase their journey. The key takeaway, really hammered home in the sources using Deuteronomy, is that salvation comes entirely from God's grace, not because we're inherently righteous or earned it. And understanding that should foster humility, right? Prevent that kind of self-righteous attitude.
So let me try and summarize this. What these sources seem to be saying is, God's predestination works with his foreknowledge. He knows our free choices, choices made possible by his grace, and his sovereign plan perfectly incorporates that knowledge without overriding our freedom.
That captures the essence of it, yes. A harmony between divine sovereignty and human responsibility enabled by grace.
Okay, so here's a final thought, something maybe for you to chew on as you continue your own deep dive. The sources mention we can't know for sure in this life if you're ultimately wheat or weeds, or if our name will definitively stay in the book of life.
That uncertainty.
Right. So if God already knows the final outcome for every single person, why is our moment-to-moment commitment, our choice to believe and obey right now, presented as so incredibly crucial for us? Why does it feel so vital on our end, even with that divine certainty hovering in the background?